The lived experience of Americans did not match what was coming through in corporate media. And you can make the same case today. In fact, that case has only gotten stronger with time. They're bomb throwers or podium thumpers. They are conspiracy theorists, and their job is effectively to tear down institutions, to expose the truth. The convergence of chaos media and the addiction economy have streamlined, weaponized information in ways that we've never seen before, that are truly unprecedented, perhaps not since the French Revolution and the sort of network of cafes that were disseminating revolutionary ideas. This might be the precondition for a counter-thrust, what I've called a neo-masculine movement, in the opposite direction. Welcome back to Men and the City. I hope all of you are doing well. It's a beautiful day here on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., so I thought we could talk about chaos media and pissed off men. Throughout my time as a social media person, which is not all that long, and before that, when I got to know a lot of folks that have very big YouTube channels or influencers, in some cases people that were in the traditional media, whether it was sort of a 5 o'clock news, local cable show, or it was something like Fox News, the perception that's very common among the public in general, and perhaps among the sort of technocrats that run the media industrial complex, is that the media is an instrument of power, that ultimately whoever wields the propaganda machine that comes through the screen, whether that's on your tablet, your phone, through a television set, doesn't matter. Whether it's produced in Hollywood or in New York City for a major corporation like CNN, that the power rests in their hands. This is an idea that was laid bare by Edward Bernays in his famous book, Propaganda, in which he says explicitly that democracy requires propaganda, or what he called the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the managerial elite, if you will. Certainly, propaganda is a dynamic force that can affect and change minds. There's no question about that. But it is also a mirror.
The power of prior attention manifests itself in ways that are hard to imagine. They're so far-reaching. One of them is that the power of prior attention tends to focus people in a way that makes them think that the factor they're paying attention to is the cause of the result that they see, even when it clearly can't be. Could you give me an example of that?
There's a way to characterize this by saying what's focal is perceived as causal. What we are paying attention to normally in our environment is those things that are causes, those things that are causing the activity in our environment. So when someone draws our attention to a factor, we make the mistake of assuming, oh, because I'm paying attention to it, it must be the cause. But in fact, that's not the case.
And so when I think of media, I also think of a film like Network from 1976.
Why me?
Was your own television, dummy.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Network News Hour with Howard Beale.
That film made a lot of waves at the time because it was, in many ways, a social pushback on the cookie-cutter corporate media that came through figures like Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather, Ted Koppel, people like that. It didn't really express what was happening tactically on the street level. In other words, the lived experience of Americans did not match what was coming through in corporate media. And you can make the same case today. In fact, that case has only gotten stronger with time. Network, however, communicated a sense of frustration with this imbalance.
We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad.
An imbalance that from 1976 to 1996 only got a lot worse. In 1996, you got a concentration of media power into a kind of corporate oligopoly, the likes of which we'd never seen before in what's called the Telecommunications Act of 1996. That consolidated media through horizontal and vertical integration, so basically newspapers, online websites, and televised media all integrated into giant companies like iHeartMedia or Viacom. Some of these companies you're probably familiar with today. At the same time, you had massive media giants like Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and others whose power grew likewise. However, what's interesting about that is that the sentiment from network has only intensified with time. And if you look at trust since 1996 in the mainstream media, it has all but collapsed. And within a decade of the Telecommunications Act, you got the advent of alternative media. This is what surfaced on Twitter, in YouTube videos, on Facebook, and then eventually in places like Reddit, Instagram, today, TikTok, things like that, where a majority of young people, particularly young men, get their news. Why is that? Well, it's because they don't trust the legacy media. Now, incidentally, it's not just about a loss of trust. It's also about a kind of fragmentation of order or a loss of authority. We see this loss of authority everywhere. I've talked about it in a political sense, a loss of authority of the government or of a constitutional order, a loss of authority in the household from fathers, a loss of religious authority from churches. All of this sort of moves in parallel. But the media might be the most important institution to have lost authority. And that has created what Hamish McKenzie, who's a co-founder of Substack, calls chaos media. Now listen to what he has to say here. Traditional media's rigid order has been replaced by mayhem. Conflict supersedes consideration. Speed overwhelms verification. This system is, in many senses, a marvel with massive democratization potential. Anyone can have a voice, and your idea, if the winds blow just right, can reach billions of people in an instant. We've gone from catechism to cacophony.
And in this kind of transitional moment where that stuff hasn't been figured out yet, chaos rules. And so if culture and the media systems are dancing together, influencing each other, then it's not really surprising that the winners of the chaos media system, like Elon Musk, like Donald Trump, are also have outsized power in the political media, in the political system. And so I think what we see in our culture and in our politics is directly representative of this transitional state of the media system or the information system, how we all understand the world and think together.
The chaos media environment that we're living through, which is dominated by what I've called network men. So these are men sort of like the angry, embittered, explosive rage that you get from some of the main characters in Network.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I live like a capitalist every single day, Cenk. I live as a capitalist, okay? I live what I believe.
These network men do the same thing on social media, and they rage at institutions that are corrupt, disorderly, backward, etc., etc.
We've all been raised on television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars, but we won't. We're slowly learning that fact. And we're very, very pissed off.
They're bomb throwers or podium thumpers. They are conspiracy theorists, and their job is effectively to tear down institutions, to expose the truth. And that's been extremely effective. It has, in many ways, created what I've called awareness machines. So it has rendered these Twitter spaces and YouTube videos and Patreon groups, et cetera, virtual awareness machines that are re-educating a population that's been so saturated with propaganda and misinformation that they just simply don't know what's going on. This is a sort of red pill process, as people call it. At the same time, however, you have what has been called an addiction economy. What is an addiction economy? Well, according to Wright, who's another Substack writer, this is what he says. Everything in our mass culture is a sales pitch for the global economy. Lifestyles, politics, news, entertainment, values, and the vices presented as virtues all promote the production of profit, whose byproduct is what we might call ourselves. This is a total system, a system relying on repeat sales or consumption, which could fairly be called an addiction economy. It profits from your loss of self-control and self-command. The less you use it, the less it can use you. It's exactly right. The convergence of chaos media and the addiction economy have streamlined, weaponized, if you will, information in ways that we've never seen before, that are truly unprecedented, perhaps not since the French Revolution and the sort of network of cafes that were disseminating revolutionary ideas. Or perhaps you could go back to the Reformation, when the printing press was equally potent in terms of disseminating information that was, at the time, revolutionary to the average Catholic or Christian across Europe. All of this is sort of a mirror into the alchemical transformation I've talked about before happening in young men. The chaos is a kind of fragmentation. The bomb throwing, the invectives, reflects as much as it creates the discord that we're experiencing.
So we live in a volatile political and cultural moment. And I think that moment is not because any one person is coarsening the climate or anything like that. I think it's reflecting volatility in a massive media transition. So the culture reflects and dances with and influences the media system. And the media system reflects and influences the culture. These two things work together. They're basically inseparable. This is like a common, well-known idea from like Marshall McLuhan, Neil Postman, the rest.
And many people on that basis are extremely pessimistic about where we're headed. They think that this sort of dissolution, the breakdown of authority, is only going to spiral out of control. It's going to create total anarchy, if you will. Well, I think quite the opposite. I think, in fact, we're going to see a reordering. And so does Hamish McKenzie. Listen to what he has to say here. What we're seeing now could well be the emergence of a new media organism that hasn't yet found its order. In other words, we're sort of hitting a saturation point in which the general public, which is understandably frustrated, uncertain, insecure at the street level, economically, politically, socially, we're divided into these various silos and communities. Increasingly, we're hitting a saturation point in which people need more. They need a restoration of order and authority. And I think you're going to start to see that in chaos media. I think you're going to start to see a lot of this fragmentation actually reconsolidate into something like a mass movement. In some sense, this might be the precondition for a counterthrust, what I've called a neo-masculine movement, in the opposite direction. People, in other words, have all but had enough, I think, or perhaps they're getting to the point where they need some sense of how to reorder the universe. But that reordering has to happen unconsciously as well as consciously. It has to be a sort of collective effort. And I think new media organization is going to be a linchpin in that process. The direction we're headed is towards what I call authority media. So we've gone from a legacy media that's a hollowed out corporate structure that's sort of feeding you blue pill information, if not outright lies, to the chaos media of today, which is tearing down those lies, which is dissolving these legacy institutions, which are moribund and corrupt. And ultimately, we're trending not towards a spiraling of disorder necessarily, but towards a reordering and an authority media that rests on new paradigms, on a new red pill truth, if you will. And so you're going to start to see evidence of this in new personalities that are not bomb throwers, that are not trying to subvert, undermine, or destroy admittedly corrupt institutions, but are constructing something new, are building new institutions, new corporations, and pushing new ideas around which you can reorder your thinking or potentially reorganize your life. That will be a kind of blend of traditionalism with modernity. That's the direction that we're headed in. But I think media is a mirror into that process. It is not an instrument of power at the moment. It is, in a sense, a weapon that's being used to undermine power or disempower the powered. And that's a very necessary process indeed. But it is a mirror into where we're headed. A kind of Project Mayhem, a kind of mobilization of the masses into a new frame of mind. And so for those of you who are watching this, in some sense you have to disengage from chaos media. You don't want to be saturated by the addiction economy. You want to disengage from it a bit or divest from it so that the landscape can settle before you can reorganize or reinsert yourself. Let me finish with this quote that I think should give you pause for thought. There's a higher spiritual purpose to life than information paralysis. If you can't look away from the eyeball magnet, you may not even remember it is there at all. Divest, decoupling from chaos media because of this saturation point is nearly here. I'm not saying it's months away, but I think years away to be sure. And that will be conducive to a restabilization mentally, emotionally, spiritually, etc., etc. But it is in media where we're going to start to see evidence of this. And I think everything else will cascade from there. So, chaos media is not a precursor to more chaos and disorder necessarily, as much as it is a mirror into the current dysfunctional state of mind of so many people, especially young men. But that will lead to the emergence of authority media, a reordering, if you will, of the media industrial complex, and that will betoken, I think, a mass movement that will reset society. Stay tuned for more, and we'll talk soon.